Thank you for staying with us. Now, with just over 8 months to the 2022 general election, the political landscape is abuzz with activity, ranging from the usual to the untried. I'm talking about alliances, aspirants defecting, and political promises that are now the order of the day. But what will tip the scale for the voter? Tonight, we seek for insights from my guest here in studio. Joining us is former Member of Parliament for Mokoroine, Kabando wa Kabando. Thanks for joining us this evening. Together with political strategist Joseph Simeha, thank you as well. Somehow there's some dress code tallying. We'll talk about that later on. But one man who did not receive the memo is Tom Wolf, who's an independent research analyst. Tom, thanks for joining us as well. And for our viewers, remember, you can weigh in, and I'm already seeing some of your messages. 22422 is the SMS line, and the hashtag is Newsnight. Kabando, let me start with you. 259 days to the 2022 general election. What issues, in your view, are emerging as the game changer in the presidential race so far?
Two issues are very significant on the succession race. One is the role of the outgoing president. He's a very, very important player because he is actively involved in all the politics of succession, and that means that the state machinery, individuals within the cabinet, security apparatus, provincial administrators are very actively involved in partisan politics, and that will play a very important role, either negatively or positively, depending on how it's handled. Number two is the politics of dynasty, as usual. It's dominant, it has perpetuated itself, and we are unable to disentangle. And so all the issues that are being discussed are being received respectively, depending on the geographical and ethnic locations of the audiences.
So the politics of the economy is not the track records of the so far aspirants who stood out? None of that for you has stood out so far? The
promises are very lofty, and they are very attractive, particularly from the two lead candidates, Raila Odinga and William Ruto. They have made a very passionate appeal to address the economic predicament facing a lot of people, because the unemployment issues are very high. Of course, the enterprises before and after the pandemic, the peak level has been very aggravating. And so, yes, there's an economic discussion on the table, but it is not detailed to the extent of constituting doable manifesto promises.
In your view?
In my view.
Simeha, do you agree, disagree? Do any of those factors stand out for you?
I absolutely agree with the Honorable Kabando, with the fact that, the discussion about the economy is not really an issue in this election, presidential election, and is not going to be an issue, by the way. It's interesting, by the way, we haven't even had a discussion about this, but I'm just sort of surprised that he's saying things that go through my mind all the time. As a nation, we've retreated to the ethnic regional identity being the basic mobilizing and organizing platform. And there's a positive and a negative to this. The positive is that we are coming out openly to speak about this, without fear, without pretension, without hiding it.
To speak about what? Our ethnic
basis? Our ethnic regional identity as the basic organizing platform. Previously, we've pretended, and I use these words deliberately, we've pretended that the political party is. And I'm one of the latter-day converts, because I've totally believed that previously that the political party is, that it is the mobilizing and organizing platform for political power in our country, which we are struggling to turn into a nation. I have had to accept that, Simeha, no, I'm sorry, the primary one is not the political party, is the ethnic regional identity, and that's the big issue in this election. The economy and so on are secondary. They're secondary discussions.
So for you, when you hear bottom-up, rural economy,
all those are secondary.
6,000 shillings to
my brother, they are
Kenyans?
secondary because the biggest construct of what is at stake in this election is the political construct, not the economic construct. It's important. I'm not disputing its importance. It is important. But the basic, primary, important factor is the political construct. And as a nation, we seem to have now embraced the fact that the basic organizing and mobilizing factor is the ethnic regional identity. And I'm saying that I'm a latter-day convert, by the way. That is a good thing that we speak about it openly. We don't pretend.
Okay.
We actually just speak about it openly as a country.
Very interesting. You've had Tom Wolf first. He had a stare into the distance. He's got some notes on the table. I'm not sure what he's going to say. Do you have any data?
Or a hostage?
Tom, does any of the findings from previous polls correlate with what they're talking about? That is what could determine how voters go next year. What were your thoughts as they spoke?
Oh dear. Very complicated subjects. And don't let me talk for too long like a university lecturer. Without getting into details, when we look at our data regionally, whether the issues we're asking about in different parts of the survey have to do with the country's direction, the main challenges that people are facing in the area, and so on, or nationally, attitudes about performance, government performance in certain areas, we actually see a great deal of disagreement within regions. In terms of substance, what people think, there's a great pluralism of views. So it may be the case that in terms of strategizing to capture power, the ethnic magnet or the ethnic flag is most convenient. When we look at issues, we see lots of disagreements on the ground about all kinds of issues because people are at different positions in society, whether it's a level of education, whether it's based on gender, whether it's based on whether people are going to bed hungry or not. But in a way to support what my friends have said here, when I look back at the research that I did about politics in Kenya in the late 60s and 70s, under one-party KANU, there was much more, I would say, ideological contestation even within KANU, about what Kenya's development pathway should be than there is now. It's almost, at least on the surface, it seems all about who's going to get into the kitchen where the ugali is divided, and not real policy alternatives. Now, we did see some with the BBI debate, but there are many issues, even about devolution, for example, with this conference going on. I haven't seen, maybe I've missed it. You work in the news every day. My friends here pay attention, maybe closer to day-to-day things than I do. I haven't seen any real political debate regarding to choices of the voters in next year's election about what the structure of devolution should be, or how to approach to try to fix some of its ills so far after 7 years. So I don't see this debate, leave aside ideology on policies. Sure, people on different sides of the political divide have different, at least rhetorical approaches on how to deal with mass poverty. But in terms of clear distinctions in policies about how government would be used, what the relationship between the national government and the county government should be, I'm not seeing that. Now, I'll just stop in a second and say, of course, in the 1960s and 70s, we had the Cold War on. There was a global debate about capitalism versus communism, or capitalism versus socialism. We had Nyerere with Ujamaa just next door. We even had Obote moving to the left in the late 60s and so on. That stimulated debate. The University of Nairobi and all East African universities were just seething with debates about what the best policy pathway should be for all the countries in this region and Africa as a whole. We're not seeing it now. So politics, competitive politics, it gravitates then to just ethnic advantage or class advantage for those who have power, helping their friends and so on. And I'm not seeing this policy debate. Is it too early? Am I being impatient? Once we see these formations and coalitions and alignments take clearer shape next year, Will they come out? We'll have to wait and see.
Kabando, even as we take a look at that, as you spoke about the issues that you feel will really determine how next year will play, do those issues allow someone who is not one of the leading, a new face, to step up and be a potential, future president of the Republic of Kenya? Do they sound like some, factors that could work in favor of someone who's an unknown, so to speak?
Absolutely.
Donald Trump, you mean?
Absolutely. I was looking at the statistics from the survey, and you see a very significant percentage of undecideds. That 3%, that 5%. And if you go to the rural areas, even like my rural village, people have positions. Of course, there are those that are attached emotionally to one camp, and others that are fearing to take a position. There is a lacuna. There is a huge space that can be occupied. And this has been across the country. For now, the positions that have been taken by the lead candidates have made people take positions, those who are going for elections. That's why today you have seen a lot of people from Eastern moving back to Waipa, other individuals from Central going to Oda Party, and it's also other defections in the areas where ODM has a lot of goodwill and all that. So these things are happening because of political pragmatism. What works in politics? You want to go where you are safe, where you have a real chance to be elected. And this means that in political science, 101 is about political opportunism. You go by the weed. So you adjust yourself, you tag yourself, so that elections come, you are on a good ticket. In many instances, Wahiga, when you have the right ticket in some areas, you are like 50% elected, or even can go even to near 90%. So there are areas where you get a ticket and you can come back to Nairobi and only go to vote election day. So, but there is a huge constituency that people are not touching it. If you talk to young people, irrespective of the ethnic origins and geographical locations, there is a rising number of a generation that is in early 20s to near 40 years that are really not very fanatical about the dominant players in the political scene. And this is a factor that we may be ignoring that can explode anytime. They are seeing these people the same. There is no clear opposition. Even those who are positioning themselves to be an alternative to the top two candidates are still playing safe and attaching themselves to the status quo.
Do you feel that, for example, when you saw that meeting today, Oka principals with members of the Mount Kenya Unity Forum, were they, you feel they're playing safe?
I think there's indecisiveness. The Mount Kenya Unity Forum leaders are my friends. I was in the Mother Karua in Nyeri last week on Thursday, and we addressed people on the ground. But we made sure that the issues we addressed were to do with political integrity, leadership integrity, to be careful to elect individuals who are not going to dip their fingers in the cookie jar. Corruption is the biggest threat. But when you talk about Oka, who is their leader? How different are they from those other leader camps? If a miracle happens, they may produce a candidate. I remain very pessimistic about the possibility of a third force coming from Oka. There was a possibility that a third force would have come from individuals like Kibuda Kibwana and Dr. Moisa Kitui. They may not have the ethnic muscle, but there was a quiet acceptance of a freshness that would have given an alternative on policy issues. People who can debate. If you go to Makueni, and this we even raised it with the delegate at the Nyeri meeting last week, you can see real and tangible development benefits of devolution. It is not the same in every other area. If you listen to Dr. Kitu when it comes to your studios here, you can hear, there are vibrations of the revival of the National Economic and Social Council that was the platform for Vision 2030.
But you're speaking in past tense.
In the past tense, because
you no longer feel that.
Yes, because the past is very important. Like Marcus Garvey of Jamaica would say, if you don't know your past and you don't know your history, you are like a tree without roots. There are many past instances that can generate a goodwill for the future. So in short, what we need to do, I think, is to group ourselves to interrogate everyone who is influential enough to constitute a major candidature for coming elections. Because sometimes, I remember in the opposition, and Tom can remember this, there are civil society groups that although they were non-partisan, they clearly understood the political dynamics and they tried to influence the likes of Kibaki's then, the likes of Kijana Amal or Charity Gilu then. So we need to be, not to complain always, but to initiate some actions that can influence. For instance, Raila talks about giving 6,000 shillings to most vulnerable and the poor. Ruto talks about, 50 billion to be reserved for micro enterprises and another 100 billion on mama bogas and all that. What we should be now causing to be discussed is about what is the institutional and the legislative mechanism and the budgetary predictions that can be done in order for these things to be doable.
Okay.
Otherwise, they will just be
And I'll allow you to dig a bit deeper into that, but Bwana Smeha, you can come in as well, and I can give you a chance to comment on that meeting today, where we saw OCA principals meeting with the Mount Kenya Unity Forum, and Kabano talking about a hope some few months back of a third force that would be fresh, that would be new. And some today, even, at least on social media, started dropping names, started saying, look, what if OCA and Mount Kenya Unity Forum get together and propose Martha Karua as a presidential candidate, deputized by Musalia Mudavadi? We've got Kalonzo with a position there as well. Do you think a gathering like that could change the discussion that we're having this evening?
Interesting.
A gathering like that could change, but unfortunately, with tremendous respect to them, they are carrying out this discussion on the basis of the same terms, on the same rules. How I wish OCA could actually just radically change the rules. If they could change the rules of the game, if they could refuse to buy into what has been set, and what has been set is about populism and so. One thing I've already considered too is the ethnic regional identity as a primary mobilizing, organizing platform. That me as James Mera have now finally
surrendered.
That one I've surrendered. but now we need to move beyond that. In terms of, okay, you have that, what do you do with it? If only OCA could now move beyond that and stop competing on the same rules, same terms of reference, which is pulling crowds and throwing around slogans and so on about the economy. The problem with this nation is not primarily an economic problem, it's a political problem.
It's true.
It's a political problem. If only they can face it squarely and say, look, fact is we have a political problem from pre-independence, at independence, and post-independence. Can we solve it? And if we, inshallah, if we can solve it, then on it, with it as a platform, we can then put whatever political platform, political proposal, political whatever we propose to build the nation. Then I think it will tick with the people. Right now, I think we are banding around this figure, 6,000, bottom up, I don't know how many billions and so on, but they are not addressing the political question. For me, it's so big for us to address the political construct of the problem of this nation. The leading candidates are presenting it as an economic construct. It's not, in my humble opinion. Can we begin with the political problem? If we are able to sort it out, If we are able to persuade the people, if we are able to sell this to the people and convince them that let's come together as Kenyans and converse and agree that we have this political problem, let us solve it, and then upon it as a foundation, we can have economic development. I think it will be something that can push this nation to the next level. I do not agree that you can come to me and tell me we will revive Mumias Sugar, we will revive Webuye. I'm saying this because I'm from Western, and we will revive whatnot. Please, that will not happen until and unless we sort out the political problem. And this is why I think what has reigned its head as the as the ethnic regional platform, as the platform for negotiation, let's embrace it and talk to each other as Kenyans. And then from there, we can go to the next level. So UDA indeed, OKA, UDA, yes, indeed, even UDA, ODM, Jubilee, and so on, I do not think even them, they will push us to the next level as a nation if they insist on banding these promises, but without squarely facing what the problem is of this nation and saying, good people, let's face this and solve it as a nation. I would think that OKA will stand a chance, not necessarily of winning the presidency. I'm not even, for me, I won't even get stuck on winning the presidency, but I will insist on pushing an agenda that will capture the imagination of Kenyans.
You think that should be their priority?
I think so, and they may even vote someone else as president, but they will force this agenda onto the table, and they'll say, this transition aborted. For me, from 2013, we should have had a transition. It aborted. 2017, my humble opinion, it aborted. I am terrified that this year, that transition, next year, 2022, again, there's a risk of it aborting. We need a transition. That transition is not these economic promises they make. It's about squarely facing the political problem that this country faces.
And I'll give you a chance to define that when we come, when I come back to you. But Tom, let me allow you to weigh in. I don't know if you want to talk about what your numbers are showing you about the possibility of an OKA disruption, but also tell us about undecided voters. Now, there are many Kenyans out there who say, we don't believe those opinion polls, but there seems to be some consistency around undecided voters. Were they there in 2017, 2013? Tom, what can you speak to us?
You say we're about to have a break?
After you speak.
Well, maybe we can get to those numbers after the break. Let me just make one brief comment on what Manasameka has been saying. Because of the drama that is already being created about next year's election, and I don't think the interest or that drama is misplaced. We've seen all too often young democracies fail to manage transfers of power. Even in my country, in the US, we almost lost it on January 6th this year in terms of a democratic, peaceful transfer of power. So these things cannot be taken for granted. We've seen what's been happening in Sudan and so on. So even if, especially for my Kenyan friends and many other people I interact with, are very impatient that the challenges they're facing, that they find some candidate or political grouping that will address these problems. And surely you don't have to do a survey to know, even if there's been some economic improvement in the last quarter, as we saw from, I think it was Central Bank of Kenya, big increase in economic growth, 10% and so on, as we get past this COVID thing. People are very, very impatient, especially with the drought also, lack of rains and so on. So people want problems to be addressed, and there's no reason that they shouldn't make those demands. But taking a longer view, if Kenya can have its third peaceful transfer of power next year in accordance with the Constitution, it may take, and I'm sorry, I'm getting older, so maybe I won't be around, it may take another 2, 3, or 4 elections before the kinds of choices that Kenyans are presented with at elections become clearer than they are right now. we still have basically, yes, there is a gradual generational transfer, but we can see so many of the players are still there, and they've been there for 1, 2, 3, some cases even 4 decades. So let's also take a historical view on, to address these political issues that Sameka is talking about, which are critical indeed. This may not be the election cycle when they can be addressed. People may have to go through a couple more elections and get some new faces before some of the options that Kabando was referring to actually become viable. And maybe I'll stop there and we can get to this interesting question you've raised about undecided voters and the challenge in surveys of actually measuring the degree to which, not that people are lying, but to the level to which they are fixed, they are committed to the answers that they give us. But maybe we can talk about that.
I can give you a minute. Go ahead right now.
Well, it's true, as Kabando says, that the proportion of undecided voters is still high.
What numbers are we looking at?
I can't remember the exact figures. I think in this one, you see, first of all, we had different categories of non-responses, which added up to somewhere between 20 and 25%. Yes. That's people who say, "Si Amua," people who say, when you ask them, who do you want the next president to be? Sitaki kujibu yo swali.
Okay.
Or just people who say, "Hakunam tu yoyote," which is basically a non-response. A few people even said me, or they said Uhuru. They want Uhuru, and they know he can't be on the ballot. So you get a category of non-responses, which is true. I was just looking before the last 3 elections, the surveys that I was working on. Before the 2007 election, a year before that election, in December 2006, only 9% had not already made up their minds. After that referendum defeat of the Wako draft, so-called, in November 2005, the battle lines were drawn. It was either Kibaki getting a second term, or it was Raila with the Pentagon. So that choice was very clear, and we didn't have that many people that had made up their minds. And by November 2007, in one of our surveys, only 1% didn't give us a clear, concrete
1%.
answer. Only one. That was just 5 weeks, 6 weeks before the election. Before the 2013 election, in December of 2011, just about 14 months, we had 17% who were undecided. Now, of course, in that situation, with the ICC hanging over the country, it wasn't clear even who could be allowed to stand. There were questions about Chapter 6 with the new constitution affecting William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta then and so on. So the ballot menu at the end of 2011 wasn't very clear. In fact, by December of 2012, after the election had been pushed forward by the Supreme Court to March of 2013, I was surprised to see we had 22% who didn't give us a concrete answer. And that was just about the time that this strange business was taking place between Mudavadi and Uhuru with who was actually going to be the candidate that Mount Kenya was going to support. But by the beginning of February in 2013, just a month before the election, that undecided percentage of 22% had dropped to just 3%, because by then we knew what the choices were. And finally, before the last election, 2017, which was in August, of course, 14 months before, in June of 2016, we had 12% who were undecided. In January of 2017, it was still 11%. Early July, it was 8%. But in 8 July, just 2 weeks before the August election, it was again at 10%. So this raises the question, when people say, I haven't made up my mind, what does that actually mean? In fact, we then have to ask the other much more complicated question, which is, partly depending on ethnicity, because it's true, more often than not, when people from an ethnic community have someone from their group at the top of the ticket for president or deputy running mate, even if they may not like these people personally, there is a lot of social community pressure on them. And even if these interviews and surveys are done confidentially, we know from talking to people informally, they still might think somebody's listening or somebody can find out and so on.
Okay.
In certain communities, they're waiting to the last minute to get guidance, quote unquote,
from
clan leaders or elders or even husbands or older children in the family who live in Nairobi and Wamerevuka, so they tell the wazees at home what to do and so on and so forth. But remember that in any given election, when we're talking about credible presidential candidates and their running mates, you know the ethnic arithmetic in this country. That only covers about half the population. So people from other communities who don't have somebody who's in the race who's credible. I mean, I hate to say it, but remember in 2013, our friend former PS Ole Kiapi, coming from the Maasai community, of which there are about 2%, he only got less than 1% of the vote. So not even all Maasai, because it was clear from polls and other things that the guy had no chance of winning. So many people thought, why waste my vote, even give a symbolic vote of approval to a guy who performed quite well in debates and so on and had that ethnic identity. So for half the population, we can say, that would not have a strong, credible fellow ethnic contender, there are many more factors that they would be influenced by. People who have been in politics like Kabando, and people who have been studying and been strategizing in politics like Semeka, as well as I, as a foreigner but an academic researcher who's done research on about 5 elections. We know what all of these other factors are, and we could talk about them if we had time.
Okay, and for those of you who are weighing in on this conversation, 22422 is our SMS line, #Newsnight. I'll be looking at your tweets shortly. Kabando, having listened to what Tom has spoken of, will the running mate, how significant will the running mate choices, when that does happen, possibly change the arithmetic that we're looking at right now? There are some sort of trends that have been seen. Again, many Kenyans saying this evening, we don't believe those polls, whatever, even as credible as Tom is. But nevertheless, how disruptive could the running mate choices have in this whole discussion? It
may not. In fact, I expect that by 9th of December, when Raila Odinga makes an announcement, the figures on undecided will be changing.
Whatever announcement he makes.
Whatever announcement. Of course, the announcement will be that he'll be running.
Well,
okay, that's okay. It's a dinner level.
Figures will change.
Okay, so unless a miracle happens and the alternative is done, so that will make a change. I know the running mate question is concerning a lot of people, particularly in certain areas, like this beautiful girl called the Mount Kenya, where everybody is trooping, and they are saying, if you get a running mate from Mount Kenya, we are going to come this way. But I think it may not impact so significantly if the candidate chosen has no gravitas. So it's not just about the individual person. It's also about the ethnic identity. He has given the example of a good professor, a credible person. It's about the influence of the individual on the ground. So if, for instance, Oka makes a decision and he fronts a candidate, and that candidate has a running mate who is equally influential and has an ethnic block behind, or a constituency that's inspiring, that may bring a little of change. Now, if you isolate the 2 candidates that are leading in the polls now, Raila and the Ruto. So what happens if Ruto goes and picks somebody from Mount Kenya area and Raila goes the same area? That issue will be diluted. It will be like, we are looking at you, the candidate specifically.
Do you think that's the pressure they're under tonight?
They are under that pressure, but they are also under pressure from their traditional constituencies. For instance, Raila's backyard is not necessarily Luo Nyanza. It is Western Kenya. It is coast. Those are areas that have given him a lot of support. But you see, this matter is so complicated because all these guys, these gentlemen, if I were to call them that, are affiliated to the outgoing president, the incumbent president. If you look at the polls, there is indication that a majority of Kenyans think the country is not going the right direction, which means there is a constituency out there that is discontented with the status quo, with the government. So what are these individuals looking in government? they are looking for state machinery. You know, it's so unfortunate and tragic that we are almost telling the world, and we are bringing ourselves to believe that rigging elections, electoral fraud, is acceptable. To the extent that we are saying, you go to certain political camps, and you'll see there are major players, even strategists saying, now we have the state machinery with us. We have the deep state with us. It's not about democracy. But Wahiga, it is not all negative. In the year 2002, we are at a junction. There was a global survey, and it showed that Kenya are the most optimistic community in the world. So 8 months is eternity. One day in politics is a long, long, long time. So we expect a lot of hope to come. And in any case, look at the National Rainbow Coalition, NAC. It comprises of the old dyed-in-the-wool canoe, die hands. But when they came on a platform of change, there's a lot of that was done in the first time of the Kibaki presidency with the ministers who had served the rotten past regime. So my hope is that even these individuals that we criticize, that we think are unfit, a proper coalition can happen in the remaining months that can overwhelm the individual candidature, and the movement becomes of a manifesto for change. In fact, I fear that the individuals around the center of power today, in the corridors of power, who think they are safe with this individual, and others think that they will be unsafe with the other individual. By the time we go to April, May of next year, there will be so much attrition, so much movement, such that there will be a configuration that will provide a momentum that will make the status quo, the current leaders of power, completely irrelevant in the elections of 2022.
You sound very optimistic.
Yes,
that is possible.
Yes, driven by Romans chapter 5, verse 5. Hope will never disappoint us.
Okay, you've taken us to scripture. Thank you for that. Bonasimeha, and as someone who served as a former NASA strategist, ODM, and at some point was with the ODM party as well, Kenyans waiting to hear from Raila Odinga on the 9th of December. And of course the pressure as well for a running mate. We've seen how many visits he's made to Mount Kenya and so forth. What are you expecting to hear from him actually on that day and moving forward?
Thank you, Maura. I don't know what we should expect to hear from Raila on the 9th. If I may just sneak into what Kabando said and steal from him and say, maybe Mheshimiwa Raila will be saying, I will run. Is that news? I don't think so. But on a serious note, let me come to the question you are asking of a running mate. I think the current regime from 2013 to date, with the new constitutional dispensation, has so destroyed the allure of a deputy president stroke running mate that I do not think, in my humble opinion, the running mate will anymore be about gaining political support than just interests. Political support in terms of numbers, votes. Because there's political support in terms of numbers, people, masses, to vote for you, but there's also political support in terms of interests. Aggregation, amalgamation, and articulation of interests, and they matter in politics. So I think the visits people are making to Mount Kenya, the presidential candidates, in my humble opinion, it's not so much about numbers that, let's go to Mount Kenya because we will have many numbers voting for us. But I think it's more about let's go to Mount Kenya so that we can assure the interests, and their powerful interests. Let's assure them that the next regime, if they entrust us with this responsibility, with this privilege, that we can secure their interests. And with that, then those who hold those interests, those who have the strings, the levers, then will tell those who vote here. They don't even have to give them reasons. They just need to say vote here, because they have been assured by whichever candidate that they will secure their interests. So the allure of, in my humble opinion, of a running mate stroke, therefore deputy president, it's not so much that it will give you numbers. In fact, in my humble opinion, a running mate in terms of numbers will be more important to the, in quotes, third force. The presidential candidates that are not so visible, they are not so out there, like they are the people who are about to be president and or, lead of opposition in the next 2-3 months if a presidential election is called. Why? Because if you look at the neglected population sectors, those are the people who are genuinely clamoring that they can have a bite at the cherry, that if you gave them the running mate position, that they sort of may be guaranteed, it may be false hope, but you know what, in politics it's important, that there may be some hope that you'll bring them at the negotiating table. Bringing people at the negotiating table doesn't mean that they will be part of whoever will win the presidency, but they can be part of whoever will have some power. And this power may not be that whoever wins the presidency or whoever comes second, but they have some power in terms of whoever is needed for the country to be governed peacefully going into the future. So for example, whoever will have a good number of MPs, senators, 1, 2, 3, 4, governors, and so on, you cannot ignore them. The first two, none of them will ignore those whoever comes third, but they have a significant number of MPs, members of Parliament, National Assembly, MPs, couple of senators, some 1, 2, 3 governors, and so on, and a host of MCAs. Now, to me, that is the force where running mate will have much more of value. But right now, for the ones who are the front runners, running mate is not so much about bringing in numbers, but it's much more about securing interests. And interests are not about numbers.
And not about the people.
It's not about the people. It's about the weight of 1, 2, 3, 4. The guys who carry the weight. Those are interests.
Okay. Now I do need to take that break. Will you say this in 30 seconds?
Yes. Tom, can Tom use 30 seconds, really?
Very two quick points about Deputy President, the running mate. Number one, I think it's clear, and it's been widely discussed, that the less than happy relationship between the President and his deputy, since at least the handshake, has made the choice of a running mate more problematic for any presidential candidate. Yeah. People can see that this relationship, although constitutionally is supposed to be mutually supportive, can be quite problematic. Now, in relation to that, I don't know what happened to it, but I saw in the newspapers a few weeks ago that I think out of the Kioni Committee in Parliament on Constitutional, a bill had come to Parliament. I don't think it's had its formal first reading yet. But anyway, in that, which is trying to rescue some of the amendments from the BBI constitutional referendum, which actually amended the Constitution to give the president the right to change the deputy president at will. And I think I saw Honorable Wandai from ODM make a statement that was also reported that this is something that they wouldn't accept. But anyway, it's just to say that the question about the constitutional relationship between the deputy and the president going into the next election, we can't be 100% certain that it will be what it is in the Constitution at the moment. And finally, I'm being quick, is I think there's an interesting, how can I say, eventuality or question, and that is, of the major candidates at least, which of them will announce their deputy presidential running mate first? And what will that impose, or how will that affect the choice that his main opponent makes? I mean, for example, if one of them goes first and picks somebody from Mount Kenya, will that put more or less pressure, and Kabanda was learning this, on the other main contender to do the same thing so that his contender doesn't get more of that Mount Kenya vote, considering, or will he say, I'm not going to go there, I don't want to be a copycat. I better go somewhere else, regardless of these other considerations that you mentioned. So I think these teams will have to strategize what are the pros and cons of being the first one to put their cards on the table.
Kabanda will have a stab at that when we come back. My goodness, okay, this is fascinating stuff.